souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. So you probably have heard of tandoori chicken. In this story, we're going to be talking about tandoori human. This story takes place in 1995 in Mumbai, India. On July 2nd, 2 police officers in Mumbai discovered a human body being cooked in a tandoori oven. Every homicide case is horrible, but there's something about when there's very unconventional ways either the crime was committed or the way they're disposed of the body that makes it even more terrifying. So how did these 2 police officers make this discovery? Who was the victim and who on earth was responsible for this? It was around 11:30 p.m. on July 2nd, 1995, when 2 police officers, Kunju and Pal, were walking around near a hotel that had a restaurant inside the building. The 2 officers were on patrol and they were walking by a hotel that also had a restaurant inside, and they noticed that there was a fire inside of the restaurant and they went to investigate. Now, when they reached the restaurant to try to enter to see what was going on, how they could help, they were blocked from entering the restaurant. When Officer Kunju tried to enter into the hotel to reach the restaurant, they were stopped by security, and security told them that it was a small kitchen fire, it was taken care of, the fire was out, and it was just smoke kind of left over from this. And to the police officers, you know, this seemed pretty reasonable. In kitchens, sometimes they have fires. And so it didn't seem very suspicious. I found it kind of suspicious that security would try to block them from entering. But the 2 police officers thought, okay, the fire's out, the situation's under control. And they just started continuing on along their patrol. But the fire was not out. The fire was escalating, and nearby merchants started noticing that the flames just kept getting higher and higher. As the officers walked a little farther, they started to look back and they noticed this fire was not under control. The flames were as high as 30 to 35 feet in the air, and they rushed back to see what was going on and how they could help. When they got back, again, they are stopped by security who do not want to let them enter, which is suspicious to begin with, because you'd think if your restaurant is on fire, you would want police and fire there to help you. But that was not the case. Once the police saw how high the flames were, again, they were denied entry. So they knew something was going on. So they got creative and they went around kind of to the back of the building, and there was a 7-foot tall wall, and they decided to climb the wall to gain access into this restaurant. Once they were finally able to make entry and see the actual fire, it was a fire that was coming out of the tandoor oven, which is a clay oven that gets extremely hot. It goes up to like 500 degrees. But the weird thing is that they noticed planks of wood and other, kind of pieces of logs and wood on top of the oven feeding the fire. So the people in this restaurant, at least the people in the kitchen that were involved in this, they weren't trying to put out this fire. They were trying to make the fire worse. They observed one man who was adding more bamboo and wood to the fire, and there were 2 other men just standing beside him watching him. The 2 police officers approached the man who was putting more and more wood and bamboo on the fire and told him to stop and asked him, "What the hell are you doing?" The man that was burning everything, he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We're actually part of a political party, and this is just old flyers and banners and paperwork that we just kind of want to get rid of. So you have old flyers, posters, and your plan to get rid of it is to set a fire in a kitchen, in a restaurant, and the flames are like 30 to 35 feet high." Seems legit. And obviously the police were highly suspicious because it didn't make any sense at all. So the two police officers grabbed buckets of water and they just started trying to throw water onto the fire to put it out. They had already alerted to have the firefighters come for the fire, but until they arrived, these two police officers were taking buckets themselves, trying to put out the fire, and they were successful in putting out the fire. The thing that was frightening was once the fire was out and they went to investigate what exactly was in the tandoor oven. When Officer Kunju looked inside the tandoor oven, he was horrified to discover that what was actually burning was a dismembered human body. And it did not take long for news to travel and for everyone to find out. It was a complete frenzy. It was a media frenzy. Everyone in the area. It was a huge, huge story. Who on earth is grilling human in a tandoor oven in a kitchen in the middle of Mumbai? Like, it's crazy. So with the fire out, they were able to remove the body parts and they took it to the hospital to have an autopsy done. It was soon discovered that it was the 29-year-old body of Naina Sini. She was a Congress worker and her husband, 34-year-old Sashil Sharma, he also worked for Congress, which was a political party in India. When the autopsy was done, the cause of death was determined to be burn injuries, and that didn't make any sense. This was someone who had been cut up. She didn't die in the fire. Like, I'm not even sure how they thought that that was possibly going to go over. So when the cause of death of burn injuries came back, the media, the public, everyone went wild because they knew that this was not what had caused her death. The lieutenant governor of Delhi decided that there was going to be a second autopsy performed, and this time it would be conducted by 3 different doctors. When this autopsy was performed, the doctors very quickly discovered that there were 2 bullets lodged in Naina's head. So that was her cause of death. There was no doubt someone had shot Naina before trying to get rid of her body in the most disgusting way possible. So police first want to speak with her husband. Her husband, Sashnal, he was not reachable. Police kept trying to contact him, going to his house. They could not get in contact with him at all, which obviously raised a lot of suspicion. So the police decided to then go to investigate the people who were present at the fire. Through some efforts, police were able to arrest Kumar, and he had been the man who was the one putting wood and bamboo on top of the fire. And he was also the manager of the hotel that this restaurant was in. But police knew there were a lot more people involved. The police officers had witnessed several men standing around watching as Kumar was stoking this fire, making it worse. And they were very shocked to find out that one of the men standing there watching the fire was Naina's husband, Sashil. The police immediately began searching for Sashil, and he eventually realized that he wasn't going to be able to hide from this. Everyone was looking for him. So on July 10th, 1995, he ended up surrendering to the police. Like most cases involving spouses, cases usually concern fidelity. And in this case, Sushil believed that his wife was getting a little bit too close to a mutual friend of theirs. His name was Matloob, and he was a friend to both of them, but he was a little bit closer to Naina because they had been classmates in school. There is no confirmation that Naina was having an affair, and even if she wasn't, obviously she doesn't deserve to be murdered and grilled. But the couple started having a lot of fights regarding Naina's friendship with Matloob. And her husband, he was very suspicious without a lot to go by. One time he came home and Naina was on the telephone and she was talking to someone, and as soon as her husband arrived, she hung up the phone. And her husband wasn't going to take that. So he took her phone and dialed back the number that she had just been speaking with, and it was Matloob who had answered. And at that moment, to him, that was all the confirmation he needed. He believed she was having an affair, so he took out a gun and ended her life. He then proceeded to wrap her body in plastic and put her into his car. He then drove to the restaurant where her body was burned, and he made a deal with the manager, who was the one who was, stoking the fire, adding the bamboo. He made a deal with him that they were going to dispose of her body in the oven at the restaurant. In 2007, Sushil was sentenced to death for the murder of his wife. And Kumar, who was the manager at the restaurant, who had basically been the one who started the fire, maintained the fire, he was sentenced to 7 years of vigorous punishment. And I was like, what is vigorous punishment? And I'll tell you, I love it. I looked up, got on Google. I was like, what does that mean? In India, when they say vigorous punishment, what does that mean? It means hard labor. Now, I'm telling you, I can't think of a better thing that should happen to someone who commits murder, any other horrific crimes, anything against kids. Like, I think in the Western world, we need to incorporate vigorous punishment in jails. I think you take someone's life, you need to spend the rest of your life working your ass off. I don't care what they're doing. I don't care if it's productive, but let's make them work harder. So I got to say, in India, they got it right with that one. And I think we could all learn something, that maybe our prison system needs to be a little bit more vigorous. But that's just my opinion. In 2013, Sushil, who was her husband, who had previously been sentenced to the death penalty, was then lowered to life imprisonment because he didn't have a criminal record. Who cares? And it was against his wife. So apparently, if you commit a crime, like murder against your wife, that's not as bad as if you murder someone randomly on the street. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. I'd love to know your thoughts on that one. I don't think whether you know someone or don't someone, if you take their life and then burn their body in a friggin' oven at a barbecue restaurant, it's just as terrible. But here's the problem. Nobody's in prison anymore. No. After Sushil served 23 years, they were like, okay, you're done. Go about your life. And obviously Kumar, who was only sentenced to 7 years of vigorous punishment, which I'm still so excited about. Obviously he's been released by now. But yeah, the husband started out, they were gonna, give the ultimate punishment of taking his life. Then they put it down to life imprisonment. And then after 23 years, they decided, yeah, you've done enough. So feel free to go about your life. And it's so, I don't know if you guys can hear that. Somebody is outside and their car is stuck in the snow. I hope you can't hear that. If you do, I apologize. But Kunju, who was the officer who was not letting this be covered up. When they tried to stop him go through the restaurant, he was climbing over 7-foot walls. He was given 5 rupees, which is less than a penny. Canadian, American, I think anything, it's less than a penny. That's what he was given as a thank you for your service. He ended up retiring, and it seems as though he was kind of not treated that well in his job after he was the one who had discovered all of this and didn't just walk by and let things continue and actually put a stop to it to recover what was left of Naina's body. He ended up, just not having a really great time, and he ended up retiring. And it's really sad when he had kind of gone above and beyond and done everything he could in his power to try to stop what was happening. Yeah, they decided, we're going to give you a penny for your hard work. Thank you for your service. Like, it's almost more insulting to give someone a penny than to not, But I think, there were some people, because the husband and the wife, the victim and the perpetrator, they were involved in a political party, and I'm assuming that maybe that had something to do. And the entire situation is just so strange. A man who murdered his innocent wife and then grilled her in a barbecue restaurant is just walking free. Today's story takes place in Kempsey, England. A man by the name of Andrew operated a 500-acre farm. When he had purchased the farm, it was quite run down, but he knew with a lot of hard work, he could get this farm up and operating, and he just loved being out in nature. He found having this enormous farm, all this land to work, it was very peaceful and enjoying, and it was just really a really great place for him. But that peace he felt being on that farm was about to be disrupted forever. In 2018, Andrew called a maintenance company. He had an old septic tank that was on the property of the farm that wasn't being used. It was very old, and he wanted to have maintenance workers come out to clean out the tank and service it. A man by the name of Alistair Pitt was the maintenance worker that came out to drain his septic tank. Now, he started draining the septic tank, or I'm not exactly sure how you service a septic tank, but one thing that Alistair found was he found a lot of little bones. When he found all of these little bones, he assumed they were from animals, which would be a normal response. So he kind of gathered up the bones and just kind of threw them behind some bushes on the property. It was not uncommon in his work in servicing septic tanks to find small bones from animals. And so he wasn't alarmed. He did what he had to do and he left. Andrew, the farm owner, was still having some issues with the septic tank. So he called the company again, and on July 9th, 2018, they came out to service the septic tank again. This time they found more little bones and they found some hair. Again, I guess when you service septic tanks, I guess it's not unusual somehow for little animals to get in and you find their hair and little bones and stuff. So again, when the maintenance worker was working on it, he's just thinking these are just bones from an animal, picked them up, threw them behind the bushes, the same thing he had done the previous time. And he thought that, that was kind of going to be the end of the story. The next time he came out was going to be very different. It was a year later in July 2019, and Alistair was called back by Andrew to service the septic tank again. This time it was decided that they were going to completely empty the septic tank. So they start servicing the septic tank, And this time they found much larger bones. And Andrew and Alistair are kind of talking about it. And this time they're like, those are pretty big bones for an animal. And they were thinking maybe it was a really large dog. But the two of them were very unsettled, and it wasn't like the last time where it was like, oh yeah, it's definitely just animals, throw them behind the bushes. This time they were kind of like, maybe we need to see what else is in there. So they kept going in searching the septic tank. This time they found a lot of hair, and this was not something as common because the amount of hair seemed like a lot to come from a small animal. Alistair then, at the very bottom of the tank, found a human skull. So at this point, obviously, they know that none of these are animal bones. So Andrew, the man who owns the farm, calls the police and reports to them the discovery that the septic tank company had just discovered on his property. When the police came out to the property, they obviously emptied every single thing that was in this septic tank. One thing they found was they found clothing that was from Marks and Spencer's, which is a clothing store, but the clothing labels were from the 1970s and the 1960s. So this tells the police that the clothing that this body was wearing were purchased either in the 60s or the 70s. And by the state of the bones, they could tell that this person had been in this tank for an extremely long time. So the first question to Andrew is, how long have you owned this farm? And Andrew told them he had bought the farm about 5 years ago. So immediately police knew that Andrew was not involved in this because he had not owned the farm. This is a crime that had obviously been committed many, many years before. To Andrew, though, he felt extremely sick to his stomach because when the police told him about the clothing that was from the 1960s and the 1970s, he knew immediately who it was. Because the thing is that Andrew did not buy this farm from a stranger. He had bought it from his uncle, David Venable. And Andrew knew that David's wife, Brenda, had gone missing a very long time ago. So police decide to go to David to talk to him about the body they have just discovered in this septic tank. July 15th, 2019, when they had gone to speak to David, David told them the tank had been emptied many times. It couldn't have anything to do with him. And he also stated that the tank had been searched 40 years ago when his wife went missing. And the police were like, sorry, what? What? Your wife went missing? Sorry, huh? Because when Andrew, the nephew, had been told that there was this body in the septic tank, he instantly thought that it had been his uncle's, had killed his aunt and put her in there. But he didn't mention this to police because it really shocked him that her body had been in here all these years, and he had now been living on this farm for 5 years, and it had been this peaceful place that he just really felt comfortable. And he's finding out his aunt's body had been at the bottom of that septic tank the entire time he had lived there. And Brenda, who is David's wife, she had gone missing on May 4th, 1982. David was then arrested 15 days later on July 30th, 2019. After he was arrested, he was let out on bail because obviously the police need to do DNA testing to prove that this is the body of Brenda. So he was arrested, let out on bail, and police are doing their investigation behind the scenes. And despite the police obviously believing that this was Brenda's body and that it was David who was responsible, they still needed to do a full investigation to be able to convict David of this. And so they began talking to a lot of people and finding out a lot of information, and it wasn't going to look good for David. As the police started to talk to people who knew David, who had known Brenda, one thing that came up was that David had had a lot of affairs on Brenda. His most notable affair was with a woman named Lorraine Stiles. They had begun an affair when she had started being the caretaker for David's mother and David's grandmother. The affair began in 1966 and continued on and off affair for 14 years. 14 years. Wow. And I don't know why, when I hear affairs that go on for like 14 years, it's like, shit or get off the pot. Like, pick who you want to be with. And who, like 14 years? I can't imagine having to like keep that as a secret. I can't imagine being a woman who's okay with a married man for 14 years and him being such a scumbag that he's like treating his wife this way. Like, 14 years, just, it blows my mind. I know it happens and stuff like that, but when I think about affairs going that long, I'm just like, just leave your wife or leave your mistress. Like, make a choice. Like, pick who you want to be with. Why is this? Anyways. Blah, blah, blah. I'm a little spicy today. Mwah. By 2019, when the discovery of the body was made, Lorraine had already passed away. But Lorraine had been interviewed by police when Brenda had gone missing. She had given police all the details of everything that had gone on with their affair. And she also mentioned that in 1981, David had talked to her and said that he wanted to leave his wife, Brenda, and be with Lorraine full time. After Brenda had gone missing, David had gone to Lorraine's house, and she had told police back when she had done this interview that she found it extremely eerie the way that David talked about Brenda's disappearance. He talked about it as though it was just like, you know, telling her randomly, I went and picked up bread at the store or something. Like, he was very casual in telling her as though it was not a big deal that his wife had gone missing. And he was completely unbothered in any way by it. And I mean, obviously, if he's had an affair on his wife for 14 years, he doesn't love her. But still, Lorraine found it very, very disturbing. She also found it strange a couple weeks later when he came by her house to have sex, which I don't quite understand, because you've been having an affair with him for 14 years. That part doesn't seem strange to me, but she found it weird, I guess. David and Lorraine's relationship ended in 1982 when Lorraine had spotted him around town, I guess, going on dates with other women. And then at that point, she's like, no, that's too much. You being married for 14 years, cool with that, but yeah, if you're going to start having other women, I'm out, I guess. I don't know. It's like, you know what, like, please, if they're going to do it with you, they're going to do it to you. But apparently him having a wife was okay, but him having other women he slept with wasn't. I don't know how this woman, I don't know how she was justifying all this shit in her head, but somehow, anyways, 1982, the two of them call it quits. Lorraine's had enough. Police also started looking through other interviews that had been done when Brenda had gone missing. They talked to, obviously, family, friends, people that knew David, people that knew Brenda, people he worked with. And one theme that really came through to the police was almost every single person mentioned how unbothered David was about Brenda being missing. Like, he did not seem concerned. He didn't seem upset at all. He seemed very casually, as though like they had agreed, let's break up, and she moved on and she's fine somewhere. Like, he was very, very casual about it. And everybody seemed to notice that and found it very, very bizarre. They had also taken a look at Brenda's doctor's records, because David's excuse will later come up, and it has to do with him claiming that Brenda was suffering from very bad depression, and this could be why she went missing. So they took a look at her doctor's reports, and nothing seemed too alarming in the doctor's reports regarding, this depression that he was kind of trying to push at the time she went missing, that this is what had led to her disappearance. They concluded their investigation by December, but it took another 6 months before they made the announcement that David was the person they believed was responsible for Brenda's disappearance and murder. In June 2021, David Venable was arrested and charged with Brenda's murder at the age of 88 years old. The trial took place in July 2022, and David basically denied everything. He denied having anything to do with Brenda's disappearance. He denied all of the affairs he had had. He did admit to the affair that he had with Lorraine, because there was proof that he had had an affair with Lorraine. The other affairs that he had, he just lied and said that they were just rumors, they weren't true. And even though he had admitted to the affair with Lorraine, he dismissed everything that she had said in regards to her concern about his behavior around the time after Brenda had gone missing. And he just said to police, like, she's erratic, she's crazy. And it's like, no, you're erratic, David. You're crazy. Not her. You're crazy. You're the one that murdered your wife. David denied that he would ever leave Brenda for Lorraine. And what some other people had mentioned when they had been interviewed when Brenda disappeared was that the couple were sleeping in separate beds, and the marriage was not going well. David countered that, and he said, no, we slept in the same bed until the day she disappeared, and our marriage was mostly fine. I mean, I was sleeping with a woman for 14 years, but yeah, our marriage, it was fine. No worries. Nothing to look at here. So the defense, they've got to have something, right? They've got to use something to try to defend this POS. So what they said was that Brenda had this depression, and that she must have left the house, gone outside, somehow moved the lid to the septic tank. Now, I Googled how much older septic tanks, what the average weight for the lid would be. I don't know. I couldn't find out exactly this specific septic tank, how heavy it would be. Everything I was reading, they would just say it would be too heavy for her, too heavy. When I looked it up, it sounds like for older septic tanks, the lid of it weighs between 60 and 80 pounds. Again, I'm not 100% sure that that's accurate to this. That was just the closest weight that I could find. So the defense is trying to say Brenda comes out of the house, goes to the old septic tank. She's able to move the lid off, which, yeah, that could be possible. 60 to 80 pounds would probably be a lot for her to move. But if we're going to go with plausibility, that could possibly happen. The story really falls apart because they claim she then jumps in the tank, and from inside the tank, she moves the 60 to 80 pound lid of the septic tank back over exactly where it was. And that's impossible. Like, that didn't happen. I mean, I know you got to come up with a defense, but no. The math ain't mathing on that one, sweetie, but you got to have a defense. So that's what you're going with. Go for it. Obviously, the prosecution rejected this based on common sense. Like, just use logic. That's did not happen, but okay, defense. The prosecution's case was that he had killed Brenda because he wanted to be with Lorraine, I guess, full time. So during the trial, the prosecution obviously goes over with all the information from all the family, all the interviews that had been done when Brenda went missing, and how everyone stated he was completely unbothered. He was not worried. He wasn't upset. It was just like another day to him. Like, Brenda's disappearance did not affect him at all. Also, one of his employees, Trevor Brooks, who had worked for David, said that at the time when Brenda had gone missing, he like Trevor himself and everyone who had worked for David went to David and said, do you want us to help us search for Brenda? Like, we're here, we're ready. Is there anything that we can do to help you? Is there anywhere you want us to search? And David basically said, no, like, I don't want you to look for her. And the people that worked for him were like, okay, something weird is going on, because he had no interest in really anything to do with Brenda's disappearance. So after a 5-week trial, David was found guilty, and he was found guilty by majority. And this place, if you didn't catch it at the beginning, this case takes place in England. So they don't need to have 100% yes. They just need to have majority of the jury believe that he is guilty. If you're from England and that's like, I'm not explaining that correctly, please leave it in the comments, because I did look into it and that's my understanding of it, but I'm sure somebody who lives in England would have a much better way of explaining exactly how that works and if that's correct. But he was found guilty. That's the important part. And when David heard the verdict, he had absolutely no reaction. He looked at the jury and was just stone-faced. And the High Court judge, Mrs. Tibbles, told David this. I'm going to read the statement so I get it word for word exactly what she said. So this is what the judge said to David. I'm sure you killed Brenda to remove her from your life and the complications she may have presented to you in any divorce proceedings. There is no doubt on the element of greed and selfishness. You killed Brenda in her own home, where she was recuperating with an injured leg and suffering from depression. You were Brenda's husband, and you should have been, she should have been able to trust you. Your complete lack of respect for Brenda is obvious from your decision to dispose of her body in a septic tank. The fact that that is what you did with her body is disgusting and repulsive. Give it to him, Judge. Yeah, he is repulsive and disgusting. At the age of 89, David Venable was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years. And a heartbreaking statement was made by Brenda's family after the verdict was read. And this is what the statement said. We, Brenda's nieces and nephews, are relieved that today, after a wait of 40 years, at least there is justice for Brenda. David Venable can no longer get away with having murdered his wife, the hiding of her body, and all his deceit, lies, and fabrications. We feel utter horror and despair that Brenda was murdered. She was no harm to anyone, being a gentle and increasingly quiet woman. We'll never know how she died or how much she suffered. We pray her death was quick. The torment of her body being found in the septic tank of her house will never leave us. It haunts our nights. We cannot come to terms with her being put in such a repulsive and shocking place, and then by continuing to use the septic tank. Her murderer dishonored her dead body every day for 30 years after murdering her. David robbed Brenda of the second half of her life and robbed her of any dignity in death. By concealing Brenda's remains, he made her family live through the hell of not knowing what had happened to her and robbed the family of the opportunity to bury Brenda for over 37 years. In that time, many close family members have died. Her parents would have been spared the unending wait for her return and been comforted by her continued care of them. We can imagine how much the lives of her two sisters would have been enhanced by Brenda's presence and her quiet enjoyment of their company. Both sisters were successful women in their careers. Perhaps Brenda would have been like them. She liked to travel and perhaps would have joined her two sisters on their many years of holidays together in retirement. Brenda would have been the family beauty at the wedding of her 5 surviving nieces and nephews. We would have been so proud of her. She would have taken great delight in her 10 great nieces and nephews, perhaps seeing herself reflected in the culinary skills of one, the polished beauty of another, and the active empathy of a third. We continue to miss Brenda, and we will never forget her. Her characteristics live on in our family. After 40 long years, we pray that you can at least rest in peace, Brenda. And it's just so horrible to, have her missing for all of those years. And the family, it's just, when someone goes missing, and it's not just in this case, in other true crime cases where the body isn't discovered for years and years, like the family is in this constant state of like pain and anguish. And, if you have a family member who is murdered, it's not like I think you really ever get true peace with that. But at least if you have their body treated respectfully, they can be buried, or if you prefer spreading their ashes, whatever, the family decides. At least in that, it's a way that they can like honor her. And it's just so disgusting that he literally left her body in a septic tank and continued to use it. Like, it's just disgusting. He's disgusting. And he was cool as a cucumber when the jury convicted him and he was given his sentence. But when he was led to his cell, he was heard screaming, "No, no, no," over and over and over. So that wasn't for you, that was for him. Because of his age and his sentence, he's definitely going to die in prison. But unlike Brenda, he'll be given a dignified burial, which he certainly does not deserve. So that's the end of today's story. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I'm really trying to grow the channel, so any engagement with the video is absolutely so much appreciated. You guys are absolutely amazing, and I appreciate each and every one of you, especially if you're still here listening to me. And I will see you in the next one.